Oh, fuck, Willow! My name is Matthew Kroll.
This is a true story that happened in my town. My name is Shahir Dowd.
I'll do you a favor and pretend this conversation never happened, and I'm Jermaine.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film Weapons. And dear Topam fam, obviously Shahir and I are not alone today to discuss this film that is taking cinemas, I would say, by somewhat of a minor storm. With us is friend, fellow YouTuber, creator, game designer, jack of all trades, and one of the best goddamn Night Rain players I've had the best time playing that game with. Jay, welcome to the show, buddy. How are you?
Thank you so much. I think the Night Rain thing just really threw me for a loop, but that's the best compliment I've ever received. Yeah, I'm doing great.
There you go.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Shahir, I met Jay through an overly sarcastic charity stream, I think, and then we caught up at a PAX East, and now we probably play video games like once a week at this point.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah,
and we originally bonded over an actual movie. Over the film Labyrinth.
Yes.
Oh, I saw Labyrinth many years ago. I've never revisited it, but I do remember owning the Commodore 64 version of the game, and it was a text input game where the parameters were so wide, open. I think Zork was the other one that was like this, where basically you could type anything and then hope that you got typed enough.
Was there a Labyrinth tie-in?
Yeah, there was a Labyrinth Commodore 64 text-based game that I recall playing for a while. And again, unlike any kind of game input system where you would select a set of canned responses, this was you would literally type move over to this side of the room and hope that string of words would actually activate a response.
1986. I'm looking at it right now.
That blows my mind. So Matt knows this, because this is how we bonded. You guys can't see, but you guys can see on camera. I have a Labyrinth tattoo on my arm. Cool. I collect memorabilia of Labyrinth. I have when I lived in England, I just moved to the US. I had a shrine to it. I am obsessed with that movie. And we just got chatting and, just doing the mutuals thing. And then Matt sent me a picture of them at a karaoke event dressed as Jareth. And I was like, okay, this is a friend. This is set in stone.
Oh, wet. Yeah, we got to get you in for one of those nebulous karaoke's at some time. They are insane. Yeah. But sadly, or not sadly, we are not here to talk about Labyrinth today. Maybe next time, Jay, that you're on, we can talk about Labyrinth. What real quick, what other films do you tend to gravitate towards? What's your cinematic oeuvre, if you will?
Oh, that's a really good question. So most people on the internet will know me as a game design boy. I have an entire show about how to design games. But not a lot of people know this about me. I've studied film for the same amount of time I've studied games. Film was my first love. Technically I edit all day, every day. So I'm an editor. But I think because of my film background, I tend to have... I'm going to try and put this in a way that doesn't make me sound like a dickhead. I tend to be a little bit snobby with my movies, but not in a putting other people down for what they're watching. I just love film history and where it came from, and especially horror, which is very fitting for today. I love German expressionism with Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and moving into the Universal series of horror flicks. I absolutely love that stuff. But nowadays, I'm a bit of everything. I just appreciate crafted art. I want to see people's interpretations of a subject matter or of a narrative, and as long as they're putting their spice on it, that's what I'm there for.
Has there been anything that you've seen other than the movie we're going to be discussing tonight that has really tickled your fancy of recent years?
Oh, recent years. Okay, that's a good question. I really liked
something. We always talk about movies that were kind of formative films for us, and I think Matt talks about Masters of the Universe as being one of those, which is a little bit older. I talk about an Orson Welles film, If for Fake. We both bonded over Master of the Universe as well. Just curious, like, other than Labyrinth and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, Labyrinth is the one. Labyrinth's the first one. But we can save that for another day. The one that I think, and I'm sure you've got this response a lot, it was just for my age, it was just perfect timing. Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, specifically the extras, like the behind the scenes, was what made me realize that these things were handcrafted by people. And I think that's what informed my view of media just in general. Like, if it wasn't for those, I wouldn't have gone back and tried to find the extras for Labyrinth, which is it's fascinating to watch. And it's kind of informed my just perception of movies and how they're put together and the creators behind it, and appreciating it as like a collection of people working on a thing rather than a director's vision. It's a collection of hundreds of people coming together to make this thing. So Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, we at this house we've I'm obviously from New Zealand, from Wellington, so Lord of the Rings factors in quite heavily into our overall mythos of filmmaking in New Zealand. But I've recently introduced my son to those as well, so I've actually had a lot of fun going back over those making of DVDs as well. And it's like bonding over Labyrinth is one thing, but I think the thing that I always find really fascinating is talking about Peter Jackson's early films like Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles, and then I think what his best films, Heavenly Creatures. But it's really fascinating to see the way that those films got put together. The story of Bad Taste. I don't know if either of you have seen that. His very, very first ultra low budget film, which is something we can talk about in relation to Zach Krieger in short order, is incredible. It's obviously schlocky, low budget, brains being eaten, that kind of thing, lots of vomit humor and things like that. But it is actually remarkable what he managed to pull off with a low budget. And just like a little anecdote here is there's a sequence in that film where two aliens fight each other, and both are played by Peter Jackson, and they were shot 6 months apart apparently. So in one he's completely bearded with long hair, and the other he's got short hair and no beard, and it's so intricately woven, and the camera's rolling over itself with these two characters falling over each other, and it was shot 6 months apart with the same actor because he lost one of the other actors at some point. It's that was sort of a mind-blowing moment for me. It was like, oh, this requires even if I don't think that they're good necessarily sometimes, or whatever, there's an intentionality to the way things are constructed that is must be admired in every you have to pay respect to the fact that someone put their heart and soul into this, whether you like it or not. That was kind of a key thing for me. So I'm excited then to switch gears into Zach Krieger's follow-up film from Barbarian, a movie that we talked about on this podcast and quite liked. And then, of course, famously, I have misinterpreted which movie would be Zach Krieger's follow-up several times on this podcast, because the famous story about Barbarian, about Weapons, was that it had this infamous sales pitch where every studio was trying to get this film. In recent interviews this week, he talked about the fact that they released it at 8 a.m. on Monday, and they got their first calls back within half an hour bidding for the film. And the famous story is that Jordan Peele fired his managers who couldn't acquire the film because I believe Jordan Peele was at Universal at the time. This is a Warner Brothers film. And Warner Brothers were willing to shell out $38 million for the feature screenplay itself. I'm not sure if that included some part of production budget or what have you, but that was more than Universal and Jordan Peele's company was willing to shell out. And unfortunately,
they really had a missed opportunity not releasing that script at 2:17.
2:17, yeah, that would have been 2:17
so
a.m. Yeah. I think just the unfortunate fact is which studio head would be open, would be awake at that time. So with all of that preamble, Matt, could you tell us what Weapons is about?
Of course, the Internet Movie Database states that the film Weapons is, quote, when all but one child from the same class mysteriously vanish on the same night at exactly the same time, a community is left questioning who or what is behind their disappearance. You know what? That is a fine description of this film. It gives nothing away. It sets up the stakes. And
it's
solid
just the first
7
couple
out of
minutes
10
of the movie, and that's it.
Yeah. I think that's great. I did not watch the trailer for this movie, not by choice. Just Shahir hates trailers, Jay. He does not watch them until after the movie. He hates them. He hates them so much
that I would pick a fight with a trailer.
He would punch a trailer in the throat.
in its face.
No.
If you saw a trailer in the street.
Yeah.
I was like the cop in this movie. What did I tell you?
Yeah. Oh boy, good old Han Solo himself.
Yeah.
Alden Ehrenreich.
Yeah, I think Edelrick, right? I'm not exactly sure.
Edelrick, Ehrenreich. Alden. Anyway, he's great in this movie. I guess Jay, you're our guest. Do you want to tell us sort of your first impressions of what you thought of Weapons?
Okay. So a lot of my opinions of this, as we spoke about my kind of zoomed out view of how films are put together and my impressions of just this space, a lot of my opinions are kind of broken into how individual things were done. So obviously I won't go into spoilers for this, but my initial impressions is that I came out of that movie and thought that is some of the best camera work I have ever seen.
That's a little indicative of how you thought about the movie as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hated the film.
But broadly, I really liked the movie. It's my favorite movie of this year so far.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought there was actually going to be a reveal there where it was like, I really like the camera work, but
there are things I have opinions on. I think my job is deeply criticizing game design, and I can do that with movies too. There are some things where I'm like, that's a choice, but it's a bit of spoilers, so we'll get into some of that later. But broadly speaking, I thought this movie was art with a capital T.
Nice.
And Matt, how about you?
Listen, I dug the hell out of it on a how do I put it? The way that I like this movie is I was impressed how much I liked it, because I feel like it does a lot of things in movies that I don't like.
Yeah.
But I liked every time it did them. Like I normally don't like a movie that seems in many, 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 many places to be a serious sort of thriller drama that injects as much humor into it as I feel like this movie did. Not like it's telling jokes, but there were multiple times where like the tension is broken by something funny. And like, it feels like it's like a 70-30 with this movie, where like almost like a Cabin in the Woods would be like the flip side, right? Like Cabin in the Woods is more jokey, and then you're surprised when it's sometimes terrifying. This is terrifying and you're surprised when you're joking. And oftentimes I find when a movie does that, the unnerving factor leaves for me, and I'm no longer like grabbed by the scruff by the film itself, and I'm just along for the ride because it's silly. This is a movie that has intrinsically silly moments that throughout the entirety of it, I was like, oh fuck. Like I was latched in, and I really appreciate that. I'll talk about some of the other things that I normally don't vibe with that I did vibe with here. I thought the cast was phenomenal. Obviously, Julia Garner is having a year. I was just going through, I was like, where did I first see her? And I think it was what was that?
Was it Ozark?
No, see, I haven't watched Ozark.
Oh, okay.
I know the line, the meme of her screaming, but it was actually the Netflix miniseries. I think it was Netflix, Inventing Anna.
Yeah.
I do not have time for this. I do not have time for you. And I didn't even recognize that it was her in all of these films. I never saw the Royal Hotel. I did see the Nespresso ad.
We also reviewed her in the Assistant. The sort of Harvey Weinstein adjacent movie that we.
Yep, and obviously, I did not see Wolfman. Actually, Jay, did you see Wolfman with your Universal proclivity?
I have not. No, I did not see Wolfman.
Yeah, it's not terribly well reviewed. But and then of course she was in Fantastic Four just recently, which again I talked about on that episode. I normally don't like the Silver Surfer as a character, and she actually made it interesting for me. So like I enjoyed that. I thought it was very good. I love. Oh, the last thing I'll say about it is I really enjoyed, because you talked about the camera work a little bit. I really enjoyed the structure. I wasn't expecting the structure sort of swap. It went a little bit. God, Sheer, what was that movie that we saw? We talked about it, about where you don't really know who the bad guy is, with the man and the woman, and they're in the hotel, and it's a horror movie. Why am I blanking on this? I'll dig it up. But like, it had
Strange Darling.
Strange Darling.
Yeah.
It gave me some of that kind of like structure vibe to it. That movie does more of a like actual like jumping back and forth in time, where this movie seems like it kind of, for the most part, other than truncating things, like starts stories roughly at the same time everyone sort of did, roughly. I don't know. This movie did so much more than I was expecting it to. Actually, Jay, you were singing its praises, I think, to me the day before I saw it. You were the first like human being I had spoken to about it. I'd read some reviews and things. So I was happily not disappointed. Sheer, what about you?
So in the age of the modern elevated horror, which is the term that nobody really likes, I think we can point to three different two particular filmmakers, and now add Zach Krieger into the third, to kind of see a little bit of a pattern emerging in terms of how people's bodies of work emerge in that space. And I'm talking, of course, of Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, and now Zach Krieger. And I think the interesting thing there, when you look at those three filmmakers, is their first film, in the case of Hereditary, Get Out, and Barbarian, in many ways reveals their talent. And then their second film, Us, Midsommar, and now Weapons, in many ways reveals their ambition. Because the scope expands, their notoriety expands, their ability to access resources expands. And I think in all three cases uniformly, I would sort of call it a little bit of the sophomore slump, not necessarily because the second films are bad. In fact, I quite like all three of these second movies, but I think they are made under different circumstances to those first movies. So in the case of Hereditary, Get Out, and now Barbarian, these are very first-time filmmakers who really need to sort of prove who they are and, set the stage for what they can do. And these second films are kind of come after the success of those. And so in that regards, sort of looking at it as a sort of emergent pattern, not to say that this is a consistent pattern or that, any rules apply here. I find it kind of follows the sort of the general path of those other three filmmakers, which is I liked the film for the most part. In fact, Jay, how you said I like the camera work. For me, there is a but to that, which is that I enjoyed the camera work. I think it's a very well-structured film. I think it wears its influence of Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia right on its sleeve in terms of the structure, in terms of the way it's laid out, in terms of what it's trying to do. But it's sort of unfortunate to sort of compare it to Magnolia. But there is a sort of, for me, the things that I liked about it tend to lean heavily on the way that it's constructed, it's made, its ambition, its ideas. And the thing that I tended to dislike about it, or not vibe as much with, were the kind of internal logic of how the film actually worked. And ultimately, by the end of it, getting to a point of, what is this film really getting at? And I've, since read a couple of think pieces, a couple of interviews with Zach Krieger himself in terms of like what he thinks the film is getting at and what it's talking about. And while I certainly appreciate the reading them after the fact, these were not readings that I kind of felt as I watched the film. And I want to do that without too many spoilers at this point. But, as a parent to a child that is of the same age as the children who are abducted in this film, my brain kind of did immediately activate in a way to like say, okay, well, if this has happened, then these are the things that would follow on. And I often found myself going, well, that's not what would happen in this scenario. And while I'm kind of like, I'm very, approving of the ideas that film should work within their own narrative logic and within their own sort of like fluid logic, there was some parts of this where I was like, I'm kind of trying to think about how that would actually work as opposed to what's actually happening in this movie. And it has to do with what happened to the children. You know, I mean, this is not a spoiler, but I think any scenario in any planet on, or any city in America, any town, small township in America, where 17, and I'll say it like this, 17 white children go missing, there is not a world where they move on in a month's time. You know, where people are just like, well, I don't know. Or people are going back to school. That I didn't see that scenario kind of playing out the way it kind of is.
I can dig that.
Is elaborated on in this film. But that's not to say that, you know, films can't have their own internal logic, and what his focus on is not necessarily like the sort of macro politics of this all.
Yeah. So you know what's interesting. Yeah. The reason why, because you're absolutely right. Like you think that like
17 children going missing into thin air. You know,
right?
Yeah.
But you know, and for whatever reason, and this is awful, and I hate to bring the mood down with actually getting like a bit serial here. Is that I didn't find the moving on, because I like you. I was looking for the allegory. I was looking for what this film is trying to say, and I don't think what I'm about to say next is what the film is trying to say. I don't think there's enough to support that idea. But in my hunting in the beginning first half of this movie, I was like, maybe it's this. I was starting to read it as an allegory for gun violence and mass shootings.
Not least of which there's a direct symbol to that in this movie.
Yeah. And the way that the town sort of just quietly moves on, I read as a very sadly American, like, oh, well, fuck, shit happens.
It's happened again.
And like, that's where I landed. And I think that's why, yeah, you know, like, I feel like it's not, like that's why I let that sort of go. Because like we've seen situations, you know what I mean?
I could agree with that in the situation of a gun shoot, you know, of a school shooting or a mass gun violence situation, because we've had so many of them. The situation here is so profoundly unique, which is children ran away.
I was thinking they were trying to tie it to that, and that's why I accepted it. Not that I don't think the film is actually saying a message about that. I just, that's where, which is like you, I was like, oh, that's fucking weird. And I was like, oh, well, maybe it's this. If it is, that makes sense. And obviously it didn't, but by the time we got there, I was so enamored with other things that I didn't really.
and I want to be really clear about this as well. Everything that I'm sort of going to discuss in terms of the way I felt about this movie is sort of should be tempered with, I actually quite like this. And I liked what this film was trying to do. And I liked, I'm all in on Zach Krieger at this point as well. I think Barbarian was so good. And I think this is very, demonstrates a sort of ambition that I'm all in on it. This is more of a kind of, I'm trying to figure out how I actually felt about not the construction of this film, but what this film is actually trying to say. Yeah. And where this film is getting at. Now, there's lots of different conversations where we can attack that question as well, because you can arguably say, well, it's just meant to be an entertaining romp, on the one hand. But I actually don't generally prescribe to that sort of theory. I tend to believe that whether a filmmaker intended something to have meaning, it does, whether you regard it or not. And we should, discuss that meaning. As we always say on this podcast, we continue the conversation that the movie begins. And so a lot of the things that I will talk about are sort of like little points, little
You're going to
pins.
nitpick, aren't you?
Yeah,
You're going to be me.
Oh, I'm excited.
But I always wanted to preface this with, but I did enjoy this and I wholeheartedly recommend it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think once we get into spoilers, we can all discuss what we think was what were they trying to say? Because maybe we have different answers.
But well, before we jump into spoilers, I'll just say a couple of things off the bat that again, the Magnolia reference to this, the opening of the film kind of has that sort of voiceover narrator, in this case it's a child, talking about the kind of coincidence of it all and then kind of playing the big event. One thing in Magnolia that I always remember from when I saw Magnolia in 1999 was that when the mythical thing, the big magic thing happened, the film didn't play it off as though it was a piece of surrealistic filmmaking. If you guys remember from Magnolia, when the frogs fall in Magnolia, it is devastating and it is destructive, and it happens in a way where you're going, wow, there are really frogs falling on the streets of Los Angeles in this film, and they're destroying everything, and it's not treated as a sort of biblical reference as the film kind of alludes to. At the beginning of this film, I have to say, the opening sequence where the children run out and it's played with a piece of music and treated as though it's a sort of surrealistic flight of fantasy. And I'm not necessarily as a flight of fantasy, but the film is showing its hand in terms of like, we are presenting you a moment. I was like, I wonder about the choice to do that, because what I'm watching here is one of the most horrifying things I can imagine as a parent, and the film is playing it off as a surrealistic flight of fancy. And I'm willing to go along. You know, it's the first 5 minutes of the movie, so I'm like, I'm willing to go along with this and you know, see where this story is willing to go. But I was kind of like, interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That certainly was a choice.
I agree to the point of when you said that. There's a different interpretation to that opening that you could very easily do, which is effectively, this isn't much of a spoiler, but like there's
we can start getting into spoilers.
Okay,
I think we're sort of getting in there.
Okay, cool. So there is a dream sequence later on from Josh Brolin who effectively mirrors what his son does, and he goes for it, and that's how he's
filmmaking as well.
Yeah, and if we had a like dry, silent scene of a child waking up or just leaving the house and running into the darkness, and then immediately cut to like the police, and then going into this has happened all over the city, that I think is a lot more terrifying to like see it take place, because we do watch it take place, but it's under the guise of this child telling you, like expositing,
and,
you know,
and there's a song big, playing as well, as slow motion running and that sort of thing.
That's not to say I think like what was done was bad. I just think that there are other interpretations of that scene that I think could have been more harrowing. And
I just, you know, as a parent, and there's this thing, which is that what you are describing to me is the most horrific thing, is one of the most horrific things I can imagine. And
I think,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's what makes its presentation to me interesting. It is one of the most horrific things you could possibly see. It's not obviously graphic or gory, but it is still intrinsically terrifying. And to play a moment like that is such nightmare fuel as to be perfectly honest, as not nightmare fuel,
as a beautiful moment.
Yeah. I found the juxtaposition of that incredibly unnerving. And I liked that. That was something that I had not seen before, or at least in a long while, that I can't really recall. Like, it's taking something truly horrific, showing it to you with a real like rose tint to it, and then like having a kid narrate it to you like it's a twisted bedtime story.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's like 3 angles here, and I am very uncomfortable. And I am here for this now, because the thing that I think this movie does very well in its first half is not give away the game. Like it really does. We watch a lot of movies. I think all 3 of us, it's safe to say, we watch a decent amount of film.
Yeah.
And by this point, this is by no means, I don't blame a movie for me maybe catching on to like where a plot is going. But like, I think this movie did an excellent job of like not revealing what was actually going on clearly, and stringing you along just enough to keep the interest points with its pacing. I think it was an excellent exercise in drip feeding content. Yeah. And I loved the mood of uncertainty, especially in those first 2 or 3 stories from I guess it was probably just Justine and Archer. Because by the time you get to Paul, you still don't quite know.
Yeah.
By the time you get to Paul, by the time you get to Benedict Wong's Marcus, you start getting it.
Yeah. But it's the build up to that I think is really beautiful. One of the things I noticed early on, not early on, it was the transition between, I'm terrible with names, Cop Han Solo cop,
Paul,
and the drug addict.
James.
Yeah.
Austin Abrams.
Yeah, who was fantastic in the role.
He was great.
There was something I noticed. I was very impressed with how they matched all of the scenes from different people's perspectives with the cadence of their voices, to the point where I was like, are they doing like CG fuckery to remove cameras because these look like the same takes? And I was like, these are really, really well done. And there's a scene when he gets stuck in in a hand with the needle, punches the guy, and then he says, hey, if you forget about this, I'll let you go. Everything's fine. And then he gets him up and he says, come on, I'll get you. Come on, let's get up. And in the next scene, I started thinking this. It was from the drug addict's perspective, James's perspective. And I was thinking, wow, they've matched this so well. And when he was getting him up, he said something different.
Yeah.
He said different lines. And I was like, oh, it's based on perspective, not truth, right? Like of what is being said. It's based on what like their memory of it and like what they perceived while they're doing it. And I was like, that's really interesting. And then when you look at all of the horror scenes, like where Justine's laying in bed and there's the tilt back and she sees the
Gladys.
I think it's meant to be Gladys, but it's like clowny, like hyper version of Gladys. Mm-hmm. That is so smart to imply this like horrific. It's got that big like triangle-esque orange hair with the exaggerated makeup, and it's horrific, waving in the woods. And then when you get to Benedict Wong's POV and you see that silhouette coming, you're immediately like, it's that thing. It's whatever we've been seeing. And Gladys is horrific, right? When you see her, she's meant to be unsettling, but not as unsettling as what that creature was, but it immediately sets them up as danger and the problem. And I think that's very, very smart how they did that.
Yeah. Also, Gladys, played by Amy Madigan, who I just realized, Shahir, before you got on this call, actually played, and I could not believe this, played McCoy in Streets of Fire in '84.
Right, yeah.
And I was like, holy shit.
She won an Oscar for, was it not Field of Dreams? It was Twice in a Lifetime.
Wow. Right, but Streets of Fire isn't.
Yeah, Streets of Fire is the one.
Yeah.
Look, I a lot of this, again, I think is exceptionally well constructed.
Yeah.
Exceedingly well constructed, to the point where you're like, yeah, I get it. Zach Krieger, you're very, very good at this. And you're an exceptional writer at this point as well, because the scenes are constructed really well. I think the reading that I am most interested in is not one that I kind of felt as I watched the movie, but it is one that I'm kind of like, percolating in my head right now, which is that the film is really dealing with the effects of alcoholism.
That was my interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, given that Krieger started writing it after Trevor Moore's death, who was another member of the Whitest Kids You Know, who died tragically just a few years ago, and was alcohol related, and Krieger himself has said he's a recovering alcoholic himself. Rereading some of the scenes I watched as interpretations of the worst tenets of what alcoholism does to a human being in terms of like robbing them of their autonomy, I think is a really, it's an interesting reading. It's, as I say, it's not one that I actually felt as I watched the movie, because as I watched the movie, I spent more time thinking about the logic of what was actually happening. But I do like that reading, and I do like the idea that the film is that way. So it might take a second viewing to really sort of land in that space. Just as the reading Us a second time around and reading Midsommar a second time around was a far more enriching experience. I'm willing to say, yeah, that's possibly the case in this scenario. In terms of, but there were choices that I kind of found not puzzling, but I was just like, that's an interesting one. The giant CGI gun over the house during the dream sequence, while again executed sort of well and eerily beautiful and eerily, put together, I kind of did feel was like, out of the logic of the visual language of the film that we had seen up until that point. And I was just sort of like going, I wonder what this would be like if the gun was just laying in the grass as he walked past, like that kind of thing. Just as
how did you interpret the gun? How did you interpret the gun?
I think to me, I think, Matt, the way you read this is like whether it's an allegory for school shootings and that sort of thing. I think the way Josh Brolin's character is sort of looking at what might have happened and how he's reacting to it and kind of thinking about the worst possible scenarios. I see it as like a manifestation of his inner fears at that moment.
Yeah.
As opposed to like what's actually happening, because what's actually happening has nothing to do with gun violence.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Yeah. So I think that's what the character, why that he sees it, why it is there, why it's supposed to be structured like that. Yeah. I do not think it is effective. I think it is a bit ham-fisted in the, but this could be about gun violence. And it was actually at that moment where I was like, oh, it's not this. Like, it can't be this. People really like this movie. This is not going to be
because if it was about gun violence, that would be a terrible choice to have a giant floating gun in a dream.
It's a better choice because it's not. It's more perplexing. Yeah. It's much more of a like, what does this symbol mean? And how do I read this symbol knowing that the film is actually not leaning in this direction at all?
And look, if the goal is to knock you off that path with that image, mission accomplished. Get the banner from the fucking aircraft carrier.
I was like,
what? But you also.
But I don't think.
I wonder if you agree about the point that it is not. The lexicon of what is happening in the film does not line up with that moment.
Yeah, no, it's completely incongruous.
It feels like an artistic choice rather than a narrative choice. Yeah. Like, it's like, hey, we're going to put this in to knock people off the trail of what they think might be happening. Because I think at that point, there aren't many hints for like what is actually happening. We haven't got enough POV. But it was the criticism I had when I came out of the theater. I was just like, I was just like, what is that? And I immediately thought of like Zach's decision to put it in. I wasn't thinking of what does this mean to the plot? What does the dream mean? I was like, why did Zach choose to do that? And
and
for me, I think that
takes you out of the movie a little bit.
Yeah, it takes me out.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I also but pre Gladys, when you're trying to figure it out. And we go through Justine Archer and Paul's kind of like takes on everything, and James to a point. I think we might get. Do we get Marcus? Do we get the teacher? No, we don't. We get James before Marcus, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. We get the principal before the junkie. No, the junkie before the.
We
principal.
Get the junkie before Marcus. Yeah, I believe.
Yeah. The way that it all kind of leads to the house. The thing that knocked me off, and again, the vibes of the movie were immaculate enough that kind of just wrapped me back right onto the rails, was that like, there's this house that is the house of the only
child
who is not taken or gone, that is now all of a sudden having newspaper and stuff put up over its windows, and no one's seeing the parents anywhere.
Under so much surveillance.
Oh, and also just matter of factly as well. Obviously, it would be strange the fact that no Ring camera was looked at around that in the area, because that's where everyone was running. And secondly, the stench from that house would be unimaginable. There are 17 children in a basement in that house who are being fed soup for a month's time. The stench of that house would be unimaginable, to the point where like, the 3 days later or the 2 days later when the FBI agents come across it, I was like, wait, are these the worst FBI agents on the planet?
Mm-hmm. Well, they just run into the woods. They're fine.
Yeah, it's just like, I couldn't imagine, like, yeah.
Here's where your Us analogy for a sophomore film really does come in. Because Us as a film is so fucking good and fun, but it for me skips a beat for... At the scale of the swing that it takes. Have you seen Us, Jay?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Yeah. The logistics are insane.
Yeah.
And here, though the scale is smaller, when you start, if you get off the vibes train, you're gonna have a bumpy ride on everything else. Luckily, I feel like the rest of it is very immaculate, and therefore, like, it smooths over these rough edges.
And that's the thing. I was always willing to give the film the benefit of the doubt. I was always like, I'm willing to go over where this thing is going because I do like the way that this is being put together. But there were just question marks in my head. Like, I couldn't imagine a more red flag FBI interview than the one with the parents who have got stabbed, fork pinholes in their faces, covered in makeup, and acting so strangely. Like I can't imagine any more higher red flags than that would be placed on the interviews with that person. And to say it was just kind of like, well, no, we're moving on. I was like, okay.
By the end, my narrative jujitsu that I did for the movie itself was because we did see Gladys in visions and in the woods and kind of all over town after a while. She and her, whatever her abilities or powers were, started to take on a bit more of a Pennywise vibe for me. Like, I felt like a convenient, based on how the film is structured and showed to you, hand wave could be that because she's doing all this mojo, it's also affecting how people engage with reality to a point. Yeah. Like, again, this is the weird part. The movie never suggests that. In fact, her power set is kind of very clear.
It's twig based.
It's all twig based. Yeah. But the way she is presented, again, with the camera work and the editing choices and the music and the pacing,
the dream sequences themselves.
Makes it feel like she is larger than just that power set. And I think that's why I was like, oh, well, I'm sure it has something to do with that.
and whenever I asked a question in my head, I often found that the film would go back through the sort of overlapping structures and sort of half-heartedly answer that question. Mm-hmm. And while I wasn't necessarily satisfied with some of the answers, and I wasn't quite, I'm still on board with the logic, I was like, okay, they have thought about this, and it is like somewhere in the ether that this will be addressed. But I just kind of, the problem is, in what I'm talking about, is that if the film really wants to deliver, or if my reaction to the film is really going, wow, what a powerful statement about alcoholism and the potency of like addiction and the way it can destroy someone's human being. I wasn't in a space where I was actually watching it for that more than I was in a space watching it for like, well, how does this work? What is the thing here?
The flow for me goes, what? Oh, and then what? And then and then kind of catharsis of just like, oh, she's being ripped apart. Cool, that's how they're going to end it. Because as soon as Gladys was introduced, I was like, where is this going? Like, what's going to happen?
And so the other thing here is just like one of my childhood traumas that I witnessed when I was a very young kid is I witnessed a young girl at my primary school, which is elementary school, putting smashing through a plate glass window. Oh. And I was the first person there when that happened. And when she turned around, her entire arm was open from shoulder to wrist. And, I could see the bones inside of her arm. So that is like a very vivid personal trauma, thing that I witnessed. Obviously more traumatic for her. I think she fully recovered and what have you. But so when this film, again, at the end of it, basically has all 17 characters who probably are pretty emaciated and weak, having been fed soup for more than a month at this point, living underground, running through plate glass windows repeatedly. There was a logic part of my brain going, look, I get that this is this is the sort of catharsis of the moment here, because what we're really wanting to see is Gladys being torn apart by her by her victims. And I understand that, and it is a poetic moment, but like the opening moment where the kids are running away, I was kind of like, that's a choice. That's an interesting choice.
That's the jokes, I was Matt. Yeah. That's the jokes that you're on about. Like it was constantly introducing these comedic moments where, like, with that scene where they were chasing Gladys, I personally thought it went on too long. I was like, how many more houses are like, I get the joke. You do a wide shot, Gladys runs, the kids go, people react. I get it. Yeah. Right. Like, get to the point. Cause it just kept going. And the same for when, James was in his twig state and Josh Brolin's just repeatedly kept throwing him across the room. Yeah. And it just kept happening. And it's like
2 less throws.
Yeah. It was like the joke was good. And then it just kept going and it was slightly pulling me out. And then a horrific scene happened again. I'm like, yay.
Yeah, the potato peeler scene was another one for me. I was like, I get what this is, and I get why this is here, and I get the sort of ick factor of what this is. But it also felt like, there are times in this movie, I think if we were to sort of say overall thesis, is that there are times in this movie where I felt like I was watching the filmmaker play as opposed to the story playing.
I think I enjoyed more of those moments than I didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
I will say it does a convenient and good job at, okay, so I don't know. I didn't clock when I first saw it until I was reading things about it, the alcoholism thing. And there is a read that like Gladys is literal alcoholism because what she does is she shows up, her will becomes the most important thing and you will go to any lengths to do what she says. Like there is a real way you can interpret that. And she needs people to exist. Like she needs however you want to feed off it, something, whatever. But if she is the embodiment of something like a disease like alcoholism, I can see that. Yeah. I did not get that when it was. The thing that I enjoyed about, I'm a sucker for like power rules and dynamics in supernatural films. Like a reason why I don't think I vibed with sort of the very end terribly upon reflection of Longlegs. Have we all seen Longlegs?
Yes. Yeah.
Was I found the little balls, the iron balls and the skulls or whatever, like so interesting. That was so cool. And it never explained it more. It was like a mystery box. And I was like, well, I'd love to, like, you've shown me this cool ass thing. And now it's like, this, what I really liked was the power set of Gladys is not even, I won't even say like smoothly. This wasn't like a magician's trick. The movie talks about multiple ways in nature that minds can be controlled. There's parasites, there's fungus, there's other stuff. And so you kind of get the vibe eventually like of how her power set, even though it is supernatural, obviously, but how it would function. And the thing that I found particularly terrifying, and I always had, we are all pet owners. Have you all heard, and this is half apocryphal, the what?
The cat.
The cat bacteria or whatever it is. Jay, are you familiar with this?
Is it
toxoplasmosis?
Yeah. So basically, a bacteria that gets in rats that makes them lose their survival instinct, and they'll just like sit there or run up to a cat. And the cat's like, "Fuck you," and then eats it. And then the cat has it. It's fine. But now they're like, if you have a cat, they're all in us. Like, and it hasn't done anything. But like, yikes. So I don't, so like, I think there's a reason why I'm fascinated with stories like that have to do with like, and again, by the end, anyone who is infected or by this power set or whatever it is basically like a pain zombie, right? Like there are 28 days later, fucking rage beast that has one goddamn goal. And that is very similar to things in that ilk in those stories. I even kind of, though it's more mindless, at least I believe at this point in whatever narrative they're telling, I had a lot of Last of Us vibes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
with the sort of,
especially when they spoke about the fungus, it was on the TV. I was like, oh, is this what it is? But then it went into Gladys. I think that's more misdirects. I think there's lots of parasitic imagery and also just narratively you can apply that to a lot of what Gladys is doing. But I think along with the weapon, I think a lot of it is very clever narrative misdirects. I don't fully agree with like, especially the gun. But I think they're there to kind of push you down a different thread so that when you get a new POV and you get some more information, you're like, well, that doesn't line up with my internal logic of what's happening. I mean, Shahir, most of the internal logic didn't line up with your thought process, but I completely sympathize with that.
Yeah. Well, and but where I actually found, okay, the movie didn't work for me, or didn't like necessarily read this way as I watched it. But then when I read I want to state that I read the idea as opposed to thinking about it myself, because I want to make sure that that's where I got the idea from that the film was about alcoholism, not because of my own analytical skills, was the idea that Alex, the boy left behind, is dealing with alcohol, essentially like is the survivor of parents who are abusive, or the survivor of someone who is dealing with alcohol abuse in their household, is that they have to care for this person and live within it when, they are themselves kind of a victim as well. And, like him feeding them soup on a daily basis, going to the store. And again, I am a parent of a child that age. So the idea that all this burden of responsibility has been laid upon this, child, is horrific, and it's hard to watch. And it is like the most sort of gut-wrenching thing is when those parents then attack the child, and all he wants is for his parents to be back again. And they were loving and caring parents at one stage as well. Mm-hmm. I think, maybe a sort of more complex, nuanced examination of how this could play out is in Get Out, when the characters that have been hypnotized are fighting against their hypnotism, or the characters that have been, whose bodies have been taken over are fighting against it. There's a sort of really famous sequence in Get Out where one character, saying no, 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 and is trying to fight the thing that they are being programmed to do. And I sort of like, oh yeah, I think there could be an interesting exploration done here of that dynamic in some way. But that's, again, not to say that it's not well executed in what I saw here. I just me personally kind of felt more that this was an exceptional technical exercise more than an emotionally resonant one. Is how I would describe how the film works for me. And so while, I appreciate both of you said it was one of the best movies you'd seen, or at least Jay, you kind of felt that way. I was kind of more...
I can agree with that criticism. I can agree with that criticism.
I'm definitely buying stock in the filmmaker, but I'm not fully invested.
You heard he's doing the next Resident Evil?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. And, there's a couple of interesting things here. One is that Warner Brothers, off the back of the success of Weapons and Sinners, has basically said we are going to invest more in original properties. But Resident Evil is one of the films that he's going to be doing next. He has gone on the record and said, look, it's a weird individual property, that a story that is kind of in the Resident Evil world, so it should be kind of weird and unusual in sort of his way. So however that plays out, it plays out.
Austin Abrams also, is meant to be the lead, right? I think.
Yeah, and I'm also like, get the bag, I'm not, absolutely go for the money. I'm sure it's not a case of going for the money, but it's like, please, if they are paying you to do what you do it.
And if they'll let him do what he wants, I'd love to see that interpretation of it. Because, he might be a huge fan of the franchise and is like with any of us, if God forbid anyone was like, hey, Jay, you can make a Labyrinth game, I think I would explode. And I would take that over any other project ever. If they were like, you can make whatever you want or a Labyrinth thing, I would take that. So hopefully he's just a big fan and he wants to get that bag,
Yeah. Yeah. And also, Warner Brothers at this point is kind of just, it feels like a little bit like kind of clamoring to whatever will work, which is fine. We all kind of are, I suppose. But I don't know. I love Resident Evil. I like the movies. I think they get schlockier and schlockier as they go, but I don't dislike them. I did not see Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City or whatever the new one was.
Yeah.
I guess, okay, what makes Resident Evil special is honestly the characters and the dumb B-movie plot that the first one started that everyone's just continuing. And now, of course, with Resident Evil 7 and Village and 8, it really they're paying homage, but they're not just trapped with those characters and introducing new characters and doing a whole bunch of stuff. Regardless, I think that those movies are special because they are, or those games are special because they are B movie story plots and action in horror, survival horror games. But I don't think translating them back is necessary. Like, so I'm less excited about that than, say, like, I go back to it all the time, but any Mortal Kombat movie. Because, like, Mortal Kombat, at least originally, was just a fighting game with interesting characters, and you could do stuff with those characters if you wanted to. Although I'm not excited for Mortal Kombat 2, I really want to be. Also a Warner Brothers property, New Line Cinema. So it feels like they have their sort of franchises they're grasping at that I don't know will save them. I hope that they do go down the path of like more, I don't know, mid to slightly higher budget original films, because it feels like that might be what they're good at, or maybe what people want.
Or, you know, I think it's a partnership conversation, which is that they're partnering with filmmakers who have visions for and can work at scales that they want them to work at.
Yeah.
You know, Ryan Coogler's gonna, Ryan Coogler with Sinners kind of demonstrates, okay, this is a filmmaker who can work at scale. And, you know, their grandest success story is Christopher Nolan. And, you know, like that is the sort of the thing that everyone's reaching for, which is that intensely personal films made by filmmakers who can work at large scales.
Is the Odyssey going to be Warner Brothers, or did Christopher Nolan leave?
I'm not entirely sure. The famously he split with Warner Brothers over the release of Tenet, and went over to Universal for Oppenheimer. I'm not sure if the Odyssey goes back to Warner Brothers or not. I'm not entirely sure, but you know, again, that's where these partnerships can work, is where they're looking at filmmakers who, you know, can both work in a franchise like Batman or Black Panther in the case of Ryan Coogler, and then make their own original things. You know, like Christopher Nolan, for all of the critiques and criticisms that we can have of, you know, certainly many of his films, there was no grander filmmaker working in the sort of one for you, one for us kind of scenario that he was. You know, he was doing a Batman movie, which he also made personal in his own, and then jumping into something like Interstellar or Inception right afterwards as well. So, you know, like that's where these partnerships work. And, you know, Zach Krieger in this case, you know, jumping over to Resident Evil and then into something else for himself, you know, whatever. That makes a lot of sense. And I, you know, like I talked about in the case of Ari Aster, particularly in the case of Hereditary, and you're sort of seeing it now as well, being supported by studios to do what he wants to do. Zach Krieger talked about the fact that in the original treatment of the film, the sequence that we talked about where the kids run out towards the end and run through plate glass windows, you know, through several houses, was initially just meant to be like in the yard, in Gladys's yard, or in the house's yard. But, you know, while in production, he was like, no, I actually think this needs to be like much grander, and it adds like a week to the production schedule. And he describes the fact that, like, perhaps after the bidding war, perhaps after the fact that Barbarian was such a success, perhaps after, you know, the sort of success of people like Jordan Peele and Ari Aster as well, is like, you know, the studio was just like, and his producers were like, yeah, okay, let's do it. You know, and it is a quite, I think there's another thing here, which is that, you know, Matt, you mentioned about being on the vibes train. If the vibes train really, you know, takes you through that sequence and you are excited and ecstatic by these children destroying Gladys's body, then I can see the film really working. And from most reviews that I've read from people I respect, it really does work. I was just not one of those people for the reasons that I align, which, and again, it's a sort of counterintuitive thing, which is that I believe films should work within their own internal logic. And, you know, that logic does not have to be human. But you know, another film that I thought about, as I was watching this, you know, and David Fincher is an influence on Zach Krieger, as he said himself, and the fact that the film is kind of like 80% a thriller and 20% a horror movie, is Gone Girl. You know, Gone Girl is a movie where one person goes missing and the world explodes because of it. You know, like, so the repercussions of it on television with legal repercussions and everything are huge. And that's what that film is about. And obviously it's a different movie. But I was like, in the case of this movie, I was like, and a month later, we kind of, you know, kids started going back to school. And the one kid who was left behind is ominously just like coming to school and leaving and not being met by his parents anymore, and like getting on a bus by himself. And I was like, this doesn't
you mentioned it earlier with like the nobody noticing on anyone else's Zoom cameras on that road, seeing all of those children run up that street. But the logic of the child is one of the ones that got me. I was firmly on the vibe train. I'll agree with Matt. I was on it. But there are moments where I'd go, but I can like detach myself from it and enjoy the wind in my hair while the train's going. But the main one was like, I used to work in education, used to work in a school with special needs children. And then I went into teaching at university. But in those settings, if a child doesn't speak as much as usual in a day, we descend on them and check things. And it's like, oh, this child's house where all of the other children have gone missing, like you said, has been boarded up with paper, and the parents have had strokes and need caring for and have pinpricks in their faces from forks. Like the entire town would be descending on that house. And also, you know, the logic train that I sort of jumped on to sort of work my way through this at the beginning was that something mystical and fantastical has happened to these kids, right? And so therefore, the fact that they all ran to one house is like, you know, that nobody, like the detectives in this town are like, well, there's no trackers. There's no one kind of figuring out that, well, there are 20 people that have like run through a neighborhood and left physical trails of where they ran. They mention canine units, and they're like, the canine units got nothing. And if they did, I wouldn't tell you, because like it's Josh Brolin.
But you know, like Josh Brolin right? uses trigonometry.
Yeah, and Josh Brolin 1 month later decides to pull out the ruler and like go, well, what
Where
about
are these
this?
kids running?
What direction? I was like, this seems. It seems like the first thing all of these people, given the fact it's not a school shooting, it's like these kids all ran out of their house and was all documented by every single person's camera, or, you know, at least 2 or 3 people's cameras. Like, it seems like somebody might have done this work.
What if there were only 2 families with Ring cameras?
Perhaps I think, and I hate being the person that says, well, actually, I hate pushing up my nose.
No, you
like,
don't.
I really do. Because imagine if I did this with a David Lynch movie, or imagine if I did this with a Denis Villeneuve film, or something like that, where it's like the internal logic of the film should hold to be the most important factor. My point is that I was often not within the internal logic of the film to think about those things, to let those things go.
You're eating good right now, is what you're doing.
Well, no, I wanted to love this. I did. I really wanted to love this because I really did like it. And and, you know, to quote Jay at the beginning of this, that was some damn fine camera work.
Oh, can we gush about the camera work for a second? Yeah. The moment I knew, like, I enjoyed the opening, but as I said, I had criticisms of like, oh, you could have done this in a different way. It could have been a little bit more impactful. That's just my opinion. The moment that I was like, all right, I'm here, I'm settled in, was the moment when they were zooming in on Justine's head while she's in the school conference, and it's panning into the back of her head, and then
they move the other actor out of the way. Yep. You know, they do like
they
sort of
move through someone's head, and they've moved them so they can pan around. And I was like, that's a lot of work and a lot of forethought to just think to do that. And I'm like, right, the camera is an entity, right? Moving cameras is like one of my favorite things. And there was also another scene where Justine's walking to her house and she looks sideways to look down the street, and they focus, like they follow her focus of her eyes with the camera and then come back when she looks back. And it's very small details like that where I'm like, you guys are thinking about this so intently. Because in a scene like that, when you're using the focus to focus on the subject that your subject is looking at, you could not do that and have it still be effective, because you can have their these distance characters out of focus, and it would imply mystery and unease of not knowing who they are, what they're doing, blah blah blah. But instead, they choose to put you in the frame with her, and there's lots of instances where they do POV shots where you don't realize they're POV shots until a character acknowledges the camera, and it's so good. So good.
Yeah, it's really effective.
I think that effectiveness is what brings specifically that element of the filmmaking and the film craft brings the whole thing together and lets me forgive many, many things that I normally don't forgive. Jay, on this show, I am famous for not liking movies that end either abruptly or in a way that I feel like the filmmaker's like, what do you think? Like, I just don't love that. This movie doesn't go super hard into that, but the ending is a discussion point of that's what people seem to be divisive on mostly.
Oh, really?
Did they like the ending or did they not like the ending? Because it ends quite abruptly without, in my opinion, nailing down any of the multitude of things that this could be an allegory for. But again, I think it speaks to the strength of, honestly, the way the film is shown to us, that like, I was just like, that was great. Hooray. Like, I just was on. The movie makes it so easy to stay on board. It's like the best shock absorbers on a bicycle you've ever fucking felt. And you're like, I should be like, my knees should be vibrating right now. And right now it's just like smooth as hell for some reason. And, I think I was enamored with that, and I was impressed so much that like things like a very quick, abrupt kind of not real, like, other than, oh, when you kill her, it all kind of stops, kinda like resolve.
Yeah,
I think I
kill the hit vampire, and all the vampires will be
released.
But
like, but also like, I don't know, in my internal logic, the way that I found kind of interesting, and what would have been an interesting thing to explore were their time, or if this was like a TV show or something, would be like, yeah, okay, so it feels like her will is what tells people what to do in that like moment, because no one who is affected by her spells or whatever comes back. Like they are always catatonic. They might start talking, I think is one line about it. Some of the kids even started talking or something like that, the narration says. It's not like when you... Oh, I guess, you know what, though? No, that's actually not true. Josh Brolin came back.
I again, logic leap that I took there was that he was only under the spell for such a short period of time.
Maybe.
That it, he was able to kind of come back.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting thesis to be made just between those three filmmakers, Jordan Peele, Ari Aster, and Zach Krieger, about the psyche of of American horror, because I think we've talked about that. It was many years ago. We did an episode about like horror cinema, and I talked about like one of the things I genuinely find terrifying in horror movies was the scene in The Omen where the nanny's mind is completely warped, and she does, she's doing it all for you, Damien, and throws herself off of a building, and it. Yeah. That's an idea that like petrifies me. The idea of like not being in control of one's faculties. And between these three films, there's certainly a sort of a continuing overlapping narrative about people not in control of their faculties because of the imposition of another person's will. And it seems to me that we were sort of talking off camera beforehand about like, perhaps in, the film Eddington, we talked about the idea of like fractured realities after COVID, and this idea that, the two opposite political spectrums as they're defined in American society seem to live in opposite realities. There's some thesis to be made here about like this sort of consistent theme of the mind not in control of itself anymore, the mind that is manipulated to another person's will. And I think, in the case of Jordan Peele, that is through the lens of race. In the case of Ari Aster, that is through the lens of trauma, intergenerational trauma. And in the case of Zach Krieger, I wonder if it's something to do with Suburbia, because there's two films now that have kind of like tackled the sort of inherent terror of what Suburbia is, and the way that Suburbia can kind of manifest itself in strange ways.
I don't know if Barbarian was Suburbia based.
Certainly an Airbnb, at least.
Right. In an area of a dead part of a town.
Of a town that is dying.
Yeah. Interesting thought process.
Yeah.
I think my final takeaway, and then maybe Shir, you go, and then Jay, you can sort of take us home, is I was very pleasantly surprised with this movie. I always really like a movie that can take me for a ride. I really want it to just be playing the Marvel vs. Capcom 3 theme song consistently. Sorry. Want to take you for a ride.
Okay, sure.
Or is that 3 or 2? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Regardless, this movie actually just does that. It delivers. It makes you intrigued, and I think even when it falls short of like being either clever enough or blatant enough with what it's actually trying to say, I didn't care. Like, I was just like, this is dope. I had a great time. Everyone, when I walked out of the theater, even the people that didn't, I was like clocking when it's a full theater, like what people are talking about as we leave, and everyone had a great time. There was a few people like, I loved it. The ending kind of weird, but like, God, it was so good. Like, everyone vibed with it. And I think it's a real, I think that's something that's special today, especially in a non-franchise. This isn't The Conjuring Last Rites, or this isn't Final Destination. This isn't shit that's been like 9 movies coming. And I really liked it. I liked that it exists, and I'm glad that it was as good as it was.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Jay have the final word here. And, I think I've kind of elaborated my points mostly here, which is that to say that while I've spent most of this episode kind of talking about the things that kind of took me out of the movie, there was not a point at which I wanted to leave the theater or felt like I wasn't getting my money's worth in this movie. And for the most part, I found that like you, was on the vibes train in terms of what this movie could deliver and what this movie it is exceptionally well executed, and it is exceptionally well put together and well crafted. And I think, like I said, I've bought stock in Zach Cregger at this point. I do struggle a little bit with coming out of this movie feeling like I had a meaningful experience, as opposed to, a really slick technical exercise. But that's not to say that the seeds of what could be a meaningful experience aren't in the movie. It's just the sort of initial reaction to how this was all put together and how this all kind of felt. And to be honest, a lot of my logical issues, which should not dictate how you watch a movie, did feel like they were at the forefront of my brain as opposed to, just swimming along with this. So I think, Jay, I am going to use your words again here. It was like, there sure was some great camera work. And I mean that in the most positive sense, was that it is a really, really, really well executed, really thoughtful, really provocative movie. And one that I would be happy to revisit, and one that I wholeheartedly recommend to anyone.
All right, Jay, take us home.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the criticisms that have been raised here, I actually agree with. I think there's lots of interpretations of what's been happening, that a lot of the plot threads that are, I feel like Alfred Hitchcock's refrigerator test, I feel like the refrigerator was slightly opening while I was watching, and it was like the light was blasting me in the face, and then the vibes would close at the door, and then I suddenly wouldn't be thinking about it anymore. But I think it was there to the point where on the drive home, what the fuck was that gun? What's the logic between this and this? But the ride and how it splits up its narrative, very similar to Magnolia and everything, was very, very powerful and kept that train going. It felt like we were getting to a new cart of that hype train. We were making our way to the engine for the ending. Yeah. And I think one of the things with the ending for me, I agree, Matt, I'm one of those people who's not a big fan of just like, what do you think? Abrupt ending, cut to hit song that's going to be listened to for the next few weeks. But I think it lines up so perfectly with, as much as the ending with the kids running out and attacking Gladys, I loved the catharsis of that it was Alex that did it. And it wasn't the spell was broken by accident. It was the will of the abused child that, through learning from watching, did the thing. And now that spell was broken and the kids ripped the woman apart, everyone is left catatonic. And I love that the answer is, everyone stays like this and everything moves on, because who are you going to listen to? Like Alex? Oh yeah, I snapped a twig and I made it all better. And it's like, okay, well, he needs help. So I love that the movie's ending was kind of like, this is it now. Like, you're not going to hear more about how the parents have been rehabilitated. So
yeah,
it'd be really interesting to see what this is like in a second watch.
Yeah, same. Also, shout out, we've been name dropping all the actors. Kerry Christopher is the kid who played Alex, who I think did a phenomenal job.
Phenomenal.
I also just want to point out that Zach Krieger cited a film that we debated and discussed hotly on this podcast many, many, many years ago. And it was just fun to hear him reference it. But you can go back and listen to that episode if you want. But he mentioned Son of Saul as being a key influence on how the camera was actually constructed in this film. And,
amazing.
And the point of view was really influenced by Son of Saul. So it was like, it's just cool that, filmmakers watch, obviously a lot of films as well.
Yeah.
And,
we're all nerds.
We're all nerds. Influences on these sleeves. Yeah, we're all nerds.
We're all nerds. And again, even the production of this movie too, we didn't get into it, but like, it was a victim of the strike, and like 80% of the people had to be recast because by the time they were shooting it, everyone was already committed. Pedro Pascal was supposed to be in this, but First Steps got in the way. Like,
then they were just like, "No, Pedro, you've taken every movie at this point. Please, just no, Pedro, no more."
Nah, throw him in everything. I don't care. Well, this has been the only podcast about the film Weapons. Jay, thank you so much for coming on the show, buddy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Where can folks find all of the wonderful things that you do across the interwebs?
So you guys can check out my stuff over on the Second Wind YouTube channel. There's a collection of shows over there, but mine specifically is Design Delve, an animated show all about how games are made and put together. Sometimes I'm being nice and sometimes I'm being not so nice. That's putting it mildly. My podcast Windbreaker that I host with Yahtzee Croshaw and Marty Sleever. You can check that out, and DevHeads as well over there.
Hell yeah. Everyone, please go check that stuff out. It is absolutely phenomenal. And it's always nice to have a fellow game design discusser who is animated talking to a pet. We found a niche, my friend. I'm glad we've run into each other's lives.
We're kindred spirits.
Yes. Shahir, when you are not triple checking every Ring camera in a neighborhood to ensure that everyone knows where you've gone, where can folks find you?
You can find me attaching my AirTag to everything I own at my website, www.suvanova.com. That's SUVANOVA.com. Matt, when you are running face first through plate glass windows and coming out with barely a scratch, where can people find you?
You can find me with a slightly less behind me Naruto run over at my website. Extra history and extra credits over on the YouTube machines. By the time this comes out, God, what's going to be going on? Oh, we'll have just released, I think, no, it can't be this week. It's either this week or next week is our Shot Heard Round the World episode, which Jay is also in.
I'm in that one.
We treat the Shot Heard Round the World like a courtroom drama, and we have our creator friends pop in and read various lines for us, which is very, very lovely. I haven't done one of those that's that big before. I think we have like 11 creators in that thing. It's insane. But please check that out. And next week, again, Shahir and I we
delayed.
We have delayed. I'm calling it. Next week has to be K-pop Demon Hunters.
Oh, I wanted to actually. Okay, yes, it is at least 75% assured to be K-pop Demon Hunters. But I did want to shout out this one movie that I did actually want to sneak in, which is Seth Worley's film Sketch, which I'm told every time I say that out loud, people don't know what I'm talking about because of my funny accent. They think I'm saying sketch, but I'm saying sketch as in sketching a drawing on a piece of paper, which is a fantastic film that is being distributed by a smaller distributor by the name of Angel Films, who typically distribute sort of faith-based films as far as I'm aware, but this was one that was fed to me through the algorithm because of a few of the VFX people involved that I follow, and so I was kind of eager to see it, and I made a trip out to a movie theater that I had not been. I took my family, and I have to say, possibly one of the best movie-going experiences of the year for me, which was Seth Worley's film Sketch, which is about a little girl who sketches drawings in her notepad, which magically come to life through process of storytelling in the film, and one where the logic of that film, though wild as it is, seemed to cast a spell over me. And what I really appreciated there was my son was giggling and enjoyed it the whole way through and was laughing and was like, and also, it's a film that kind of harkens to the Amblin Entertainment kind of theory of films, of children's films, which is that it is suitably scary. It is suitably traumatic when it needs to be. It is not sort of bubble wrap what it is trying to do. And so it was a film that I just really want to shout out. I don't think we're going to make it to that one for next week. I'm just saying, go see it if you can see it. If you do find a screening of it near you, I wholeheartedly endorse that. But next week, is it K-pop Demon Hunters?
Yes,
are we jumping finally into K-pop?
Yeah. I've been wanting that episode to come out forever because I fucking love that movie and it lives rent free in my head.
That is the movie of the summer at this point. Like, it has only grown in its estimation the longer we have delayed it.
Jay, have you seen K-pop Demon Hunters?
I have not, but I might go watch it right now.
You absolutely should. It is worth your time. And the soundtrack will live in your head rent free. Anyway, okay. Jay, thank you very much again. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, we'll be in your ear holes whenever we get back next week singing K-pop songs. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.